Welcome to Authors on Mission. I'm excited to have Erika Andersen on the podcast today. She's the founding partner of Proteus, a premier coaching and consulting firm supporting leader readiness. Erika is an accomplished author of five best-selling leadership books, a top Forbes blogger, and works closely advising executives at Amazon, Spotify, and more. We'll be discussing all of her book, like in her entire journey of how she became an author, and also her latest book, which is Change from the Inside Out, which provides insight on leading change effectively. It's great to have you here, Erika.
Oh, thank you. I'm so thrilled. It'll be a wonderful conversation, I'm sure.
Awesome, sure. So, can you please tell our audience what's your main business? Is it consulting CEOs and organization for leadership and business?
So as you said, I'm the founder of Proteus. I founded it in 1990, so it's grown a lot since then, but our focus has always been on making it easier for people to clarify and move toward their hoped for future. So individuals and organizations to get clear about what's the future we're trying to create for ourselves, and then how do we do that? And
Mm.
so we have three practice areas that we help people. The first one is we call executive coaching, and it's executive coaching. So we help individual leaders become better leaders, get clear about the future they want to create for themselves and their business, and then move toward it. And we coach leaders individually, and we also coach teams of leaders. So that's the first practice area. Second practice area we call transformation. And we have in that our change practice, which is relevant to this most recent book. We have a vision and strategy practice, and we also do process improvement. So any kind of transformational effort that a business needs to make in order to get clear about that future and move toward it. And then our third area is called leadership development. And we do leadership and management skills training for groups of leaders. And I think the differentiation there is we really focus on helping people develop new skills. So our training isn't just motivational, like, be a good leader, listen better. It's okay, how do you actually do that? How do you delegate? How do you coach? How do you listen? How do you give feedback? How do you think strategically? All those behaviors and skills that leaders need in order to be good. So that's our
Mm.
business.
So, when you started this business, was it more towards the individual or more towards the organization? Of course, in this book, you mentioned that everything starts from inside, right? So I believe it was starting from individuals and then it moved to organizations. Exactly how did you start?
That's exactly right. Although it was simultaneous, it's like a rock dropping in a pond and creating ripples. We always thought, okay, you need to start with individuals. Leaders need to be strong. Leaders need to be clear. They need to have a
Mm.
clarity about where they're trying to go, and from their teams and from their organizations. So our both our mission and our three practice areas have been the same for the last 35 years. This is always how we've approached
Got
it.
it. Okay. Got it. Okay. So let's talk about your books as well. So you've published five books.
Yeah.
I know this could be kind of a challenging question, but what do you think, which book is the most closest to your heart or the most special one for you?
Oh, I hate to say, I feel like my other books will be sad. I always, maybe this is something about me. I always like my most recent book the best.
Yeah.
Spent years thinking and then writing it and stuff. So yeah, I think that's right. I always like the one I've most recently written the best. So maybe I'm fickle in that regard. But I think so. The reason I started writing books,
Hmm.
my first book is called Growing Great Employees, and it was published at the end of 2007. And the reason I wrote it was because I couldn't find it. It
Hmm.
didn't exist. There were a lot of books about how to manage people, but most of them were either very dense and kind of theoretical.
Yeah.
Peter Drucker's great, but you're not going to get practical advice. It's
Hmm.
theoretical, right?
Yeah.
Or they were very, from my way of thinking, very superficial, like 5 Minute Manager. And what I wanted to create was like a handbook, a
Hmm.
handbook for a manager. how do you get clear about who you're trying to hire? How do you find them? How do you get them started? How do you keep them growing? How do you transition them up or out? The whole thing. And so, because that was a lot of how we were developing leaders, I knew I could write it. So I wrote it. And then this has been true with all my books. I wrote it and then I sold it. Most people sell based on an outline, but I was very clear on the book I wanted to create. I wrote it and then I took it to this wonderful guy, my agent, who was recommended to me by my brother. And he said, it was great. His name's Jim. And he said, why did you write this book? And I said, 3 reasons. One is managing is hard, and I wanted to kind of crack the code on that. I wanted to make it easier for people to be good managers. So that's the second thing is I wanted to have it be a reference and a kind of safety net for the people we coach and train. So when they leave the coaching, when they leave the training, they have something to refer to. And the third thing, I said, I want to connect with and help people who I will never meet. And that it broadens my ability to help people. And that's turned out to be true. I think that book has sold almost 40,000 copies now. So thousands of people that I haven't met have read that book, which is great.
That's great. Yeah. So I always say this to our clients as well, that even if your book is going to change just one person's life, or that is worth it. Like, that is worth writing the book. So, and in my life as well, books have played really important role, like in every phases of my life. I just 12, 13 years ago, like I was stuck in an engineering college. I used to hate over there, and I didn't know exactly what to do. And then I found this book called Rich Dad Poor Dad by Robert Kiyosaki in my college library itself. I read that book over there, and the very same day I just dropped out of the college and I decided to start something of my own. Otherwise, I would have been an engineer, which I know that I wouldn't be liking that, and the cubicle life, right? So that book saved me, and not only that, like there were so many books that helped me um, transition towards like not to see failure from a different perspective and to learn from that and then move forward. So yeah, like books are really important, and I also see this as one thing. So recently, a few years ago, Bill Gates wrote a book on climate change, right? And he worked with hundreds and hundreds of scientists, spent millions of dollars on research and studies, and then finally he published this book, and he's selling it for, I think, $15-20. So any normal person can find all the knowledge or wisdom that Bill Gates has after spending that much of money in just $15-20. This is the power of books, right? So you as well, like when you have worked with hundreds of clients in the past, and you know exactly how leadership works, how it should work, and then you cracked the code and wrote a book, and it has read by 40,000 readers. So imagine that. Otherwise, somewhere like books are kind of changing the world. So
absolutely. I couldn't agree more with everything you've said, and I think this is probably true for every author, but the emails or the texts or the messages that you get from people saying, this book, your book has really changed the way I think about this, or this book has really helped me to do X. That's just, you can't even, those are always the best days.
Exactly. Are all books published by a traditional publisher?
Traditional or, I mean, none of them are self-published. They're all, the first 3 by very traditional publishers, and then the last 2 by kind of, I guess they're all traditional publishers. The last 2 publishers were smaller publishers, but still traditional. Yeah, yeah.
I'm not sure whether you would be comfortable sharing, like, how does the publishing world work, like the traditionally publishing world work? Uh, did you reach out to them, send them the manuscript, or they reached out to you? What kind of royalty structure you guys have? Like, would you open up
Kind of,
to
kind of
sharing that?
both. The first three, I had my wonderful agent Jim,
Yeah.
and Jim Levine, and he actually there was a lot of interest in each of the first three books, so he put them up at auction, which
Mm,
is what there's a lot of interest, and so that was great, and so I got not a huge royalty, but royalty on each of the first three, and then the fourth one. Um, a wonderful woman who was the publisher of a small publisher named Bibliomotion. She came to me and said, I've really liked your books. I've really seen how they've done. I'd love to publish your next book. And I said, oh, it just so happens I'm about 90% of the way done writing it, so I'll give it to you. And they published it. So she came to me on
yeah.
that one. And then on the last one, Bibliomotion had been sold to a bigger publisher that I didn't like and wasn't doing a good job with the titles that they had. And so I went back to her and asked her who she'd recommend.
Mm,
And she recommended Barrett Kohler, and they were lovely to deal with. And they by that time I'd written this last book, and they liked it and they wanted to publish it. So that's how it worked for me.
got it. Usually, how much time does it take you to write a book, like from scratch, nothing, to a complete manuscript?
It takes me about a year. And for all five of them, it's taken about a year. It took a little bit longer for the last one because it was during the pandemic and I
Yeah.
took a kind of 6 month hiatus to make sure that our business didn't go bust, you know.
Mm,
Um, so that was about a year and a half, maybe almost 2 years. But generally it takes about a year because so my process has become, since I've done it a number of times, my process is pretty clear. I start out, and as I said to you earlier, I'm always trying to crack a code. I'm always trying to make some complicated thing easier for people by finding some central model or approach that I can then teach people in a practical way, and it'll make it easier for them to do whatever the thing
great.
is. So I think through like what problem am I trying to solve for people? And as soon as I get clear about that, then there's usually about a 6 month period of thinking about how I'm going to solve that problem. And then when I'm clear about it, then I outline the book and then I start writing. So the
Wow.
whole process is usually a couple years, but the actual writing is usually about a year.
Got it. So the clients that I deal with, the people I deal with, usually these are the people like who are very busy,
Yeah.
professionals, business owners, C-suite executives, consultants, thought leaders. They want to write a book, but they are stuck. They are busy. They don't have the time to write it. Most of them are thinking to write a book for 5 years, 10 years, some for 20 years, 25 years. I assume you are also very busy. You also have a lot of things to do. How do you manage? How do you somehow get the time to write the book while running your businesses and running your consultations?
I think it's a matter of what you love. You find time to do the things you love, and I love writing. I love the process of writing. And so, when in previous years when I was writing books and I was really busy in the business, now I've stepped back some and my two younger partners are really running it, so it's easy to find time.
Hmm.
But 10 years ago, 15 years ago, when I was writing books, I would write on transportation. I always joke that trains, planes, and automobiles is why I have books. So you just, if you love it and you want to do it, you find the time. But I think a lot of people don't love to write.
Yeah,
And a lot
yeah.
of people a lot of people who have important things to say don't really know how to write. Writing is a
Mm,
craft. And so if you don't love it and you're not great at it, I think it's great to find somebody to help, like you guys.
mm, yeah. And even the seasoned writers, they have this called writer's block. Do you get writer's block? If yes, then how do you deal with that?
I've never had writer's block, but I
Oh,
think it's because I have some ways of approaching writing that make it easier. So I'll share that. It might be helpful to
Yeah,
people.
sure. Yeah, sure. Please.
So what I find for myself is that getting as clear as possible about the shape of what I'm writing is very helpful. So I start out, once I know, the problem I'm trying to solve, then over a period of time, I kind of outline the book, like how is it going to flow? And I write a couple of sentences about what I think each chapter is going to be. And it doesn't always turn out like that, but it's great to have a frame, right?
Yeah.
And then the way I write, I think, is very helpful too. So, and I'm just about to start writing my new book. So this is top of mind. So,
Do you have the title ready?
yeah, it's very exciting. It's called The New Old Age. And the subtitle is Crafting Your Best Later Life.
Love it. Love it.
Yeah,
Awesome.
very exciting.
Yeah,
So
you
I've
go.
got it outlined and I'm just about to start writing. So what I do before I start writing is I think through how I want to start. I mess around with it in my brain until I have the first couple of sentences. And I think that's what the problem with writer's block is you're looking at a blank page, you don't know how to start, right? So I think about it until I have the first couple of sentences or the first paragraph. And then I sit down at my computer and I start writing and I write that. And then a lot of it is how I talk to myself. Then I say to myself, hey, I'm just messing around. It doesn't matter if this is right. I think that's the other thing that creates writer's block is you're like, oh my God, I got to be perfect, right? So I start with my first couple sentences and then I just keep writing. And I
Okay.
write until I feel like I'm too far out over my skis, like I don't really know what I'm saying anymore. Sometimes that's a page, sometimes it's 3 pages, and then I stop. When it doesn't feel like I can talk anymore, I stop. And then, and I think this is really important, when I come back to write more, I start at the beginning. I start where I started last time
Mm.
and review and sometimes do some editing, maybe move some
Yeah.
things around. And so by the time I get to the end of where I was before, I'm kind of on a roll. I have some momentum so that it's easy to keep going. So
Good.
that's how I write the whole thing. I always go
Good.
back at the beginning of my last writing session and do a little
Mm.
revising, editing, and then keep going. So that's my process and it seems to work really well.
Great. And how does your writing routine works? Like, are you a morning person, night person? Like, when do you write exactly?
I've spoken to a lot of other authors about this, and it seems like most authors need to find, like people need to find the right time to exercise. Most
Yeah.
authors need to find, well, like my brother, who's an author, who's a best-selling, well-known author. He always writes in the morning. He gets
Mm.
up, has coffee, eats a little breakfast, and sit down, and then he spends most of the morning writing. I am just the opposite. I write when the mood strikes me, and it's very important to me to write when I feel like writing. And now that I'm sort of,
Mm.
semi-retired, I'm only working about 20 hours a week. It's easy to find time to write, but it's never the same. It's really for me, it's about am I ready to write versus what time of day or night it is. But I
Yeah.
know that's not most people. Most people do need to create a schedule for themselves.
For you, what is more fun, writing books or consulting leaders?
Oh, that is an impossible question. It's two very different kinds of fun, you know? So for me, writing a book is wonderful because I get into what people have come to call the flow state,
Yeah.
where you're just like,
Mm.
you're in a flow and I kind of forget what time it is. I've had my husband say to me when I'm writing, hey, sweetie, are you hungry? Should we have dinner? I'm like, how time. I sat down at noon. What, seriously? So that's what that just you. I almost get into an altered state, and that's really fun. But consulting with leaders or acting as an advisor to my own partners, that's a different kind of fun. It just kind of engages your whole brain, and you really have to think holistically about
Mhm.
them and their situation and the problem and then there's this wonderful dance of you want to help them, but you want to help them help themselves more than you want to give them the answer, you know?
Mm, mm,
There's a wonderful quote that I found on the internet years ago, and I love this. It said, "The best teachers show people where to look. They don't tell them what they'll see,"
mm. Love it.
right?
Yeah, yeah,
So
yeah.
when
Of course.
I'm listening to people, it's like, have you thought about this? Or I wonder about, look over there, I wonder about that. And it's a whole different kind of fun. They're both extremely fun.
Mm. So seems like you are a problem solver, and I think you have a system thinking approach.
Yes.
Um, so when you started this business, how did you get to know that this is the right fit for me? And I should start a company where I'm going to consult leaders and businesses and advise people. Like what was the point? Like, okay, were you working in corporates before? Tell me a little bit of background.
Great question. So I had, in the kind of 10 years preceding when I started the company in 1990, I had worked for two companies that did primarily leadership training. And as it got toward the end of that decade, right, the year before I started my business, there were a couple of things that that I wanted to do differently. One was I I wanted to be what has now come to be called a business partner. I don't know if that was a term of art 35 years ago, but because I saw that most corporate clients dealt with the companies that I was working with like we were just vendors. It was a very transactional relationship. Like, here, give me a training and I'll give you some money, And I really wanted to partner with them too, and to do the thing that's turned out to be the mission of Proteus, which is to help them get clear about the future they want to create for themselves and move toward it. And I wanted to do that, and I felt like I could do that. I felt like that wasn't being done much, and that if somebody could do it, that there would be a lot of call for it, that I could build a business doing that. And I felt pretty confident that I could do that I knew how to do that.
Mm. So
And
you've been great. So you've been in this business for, I think, 3 decades now,
yeah.
more than 3 decades. So for you, what kind of changes do you see um, in the leadership? So of course, 30 years ago, there was no internet. Uh,
Yeah.
People used to go there in the office. Now, most of the things are virtual. What kind of changes do you see in this world, especially after a pandemic, in the leadership perspective?
So one of the things that the pandemic has done, I think, and I see this as a positive thing, is it has really a lot more leaders now than 4 years ago really do understand the value of their people, the value of team, the value of clear communication. All this stuff has been amplified. When you're working like we're talking right now by video, it's even, I mean, your business is all over the world, so you see this. When people are in the same place, you can you can kind of get away with worse communication because you're right there with each other and you can kind of fix it up and pick it up and do it, kind of ad hoc. But when you're in different places and you only see each other like this, your
Yeah.
communications through email or through video call, it's really important to be clear.
Mm,
And it's really important to support people. And it's really important to figure out how not just to have purely business conversation. How do you connect with each other?
mm,
So
mm.
I think that's one of the silver linings of the pandemic. I think most leaders realize more now than they did 4 years ago how important it is to lead well, to connect with people, to understand them, to communicate, all those things, right?
Yeah. And tell me about the marketing. So, of course, for the first book you sold more than 40,000 copies. Did you also do some sort of marketing, or your publisher did all distribution, and they were kind of they played the major role in selling 40,000 copies. Exactly what happened over there?
So one of the things I should make clear is that the 40,000 copies have happened over the last, how long has it been? 16 years. So
Yeah.
it's a very good backlist book. It's still selling because it's kind of universal and timeless. How do you manage people well, you know? So that's happened over time. But it's funny that I was so innocent with that first book. I figured, the publisher would do it all. And publisher never does it all. And it's when I realized that, oh, I have to be the CEO of this book. And I didn't know very much about publicity or marketing. They did some things, but I hired a woman to kind of help. And then for the second, third, and fourth books, I hired a publicist, knowing that the publisher was probably not going to do that much, and that was helpful. And then for this last book, the publisher actually hired a publicist right around the time of publishing to get me on a bunch of podcasts and to get get a bunch of articles out there and stuff. So that was good. But yeah, it's definitely, I mean, you know this better than anybody. It's really important to have somebody doing the marketing of the book.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So for you, like for the first publisher that you worked with, in your experience, what exactly is their role? What do they do in the book publishing process?
Yeah.
And as an author, what is your roles and responsibilities?
So their role, as they saw it, and remember, this is 2007, so Barnes and Noble was still a big thing, and it's
Yeah,
still
yeah,
trying
yeah.
to in Barnes and Noble. So they saw their primary role, I think, as distribution, good distribution, getting it into Barnes and Noble, getting it to
Mm,
other, the other booksellers that existed at the time. Secondarily, getting it on Amazon. Amazon wasn't as huge as it is now.
mm,
And then I think secondarily they saw their role as, well, very first just to make the book, like do the copy editing,
yeah, yeah.
work, do
Designing,
cover, all that.
formatting. Yeah, yeah.
But then after that, distribution, and and that at the time that meant partly kind of selling it to the sales force at Barnes and Noble, so they would want to have it and sell it and stuff, which doesn't even hardly exist anymore. And and then I think they saw marketing third, and they did do some marketing. They got me, it was reviewed in the Harvard Business Review very positively, which was really helpful. And they got me a couple of other articles,
Mm,
but I think that's what they saw as their role. And anything beyond that, in terms of getting the word out and marketing and stuff, one fortunate thing is we've always used my books in our business. So that's
mm,
another source of selling. I don't do, a lot of authors do a lot of speaking.
yeah.
I do some, but not much. It's never been a main source of income, and it's never been a main source of book sales, which is not
Mm,
true for a lot of authors. But we do sell books to our clients as support for various kinds of, coaching and training and stuff that we do.
mm. So tell me more about it. Like what are the other ways you are monetizing the book in the back end? Like, are you distributing the book to your clients? Are you getting clients through the book? Like, what exactly how are you using the book?
So all of the books we are references, resources for our clients. So
Mm,
like if we do a, a vision strategy work with a client, we'll include copies of my book about that process, which is called Being Strategic, um, for each of the people that we're directly affecting, usually the senior team and their next layer or so down. So that's one way. Same thing with change book. If we do an accelerating change process, or we're doing a transformational effort with a client, we encourage them to buy the book to help the people who are involved in the change understand better how change works, understand better the process they're going through. If we do a management skills training, we include the Growing Great Employees book If we do a leadership training, we include the leading so people follow books. So that's been our kind of main way of monetizing the book through our business, is including it in appropriate interventions that we do with clients.
And what kind of major changes you see in your life and in your business after publishing these books? Like, can you tell me the before and after, like before 2007 when you
Yeah,
didn't publish your book, and
yeah.
now in 2023, like what kind of changes you see just from the books?
That's a great question. So the immediate change, and this was kind of surprising to me, I didn't expect it. What the very first book, because it did well and it was reviewed well in Harvard Business Review and other places, was credibility.
Mm.
It's like suddenly people would take my calls that didn't want to hear from me at all, and it was so fascinating to me because I knew I was exactly the same person, right? With the same
Right.
expertise and the same level of understanding. And, suddenly everybody thought I was a lot smarter and cooler than they thought beforehand. And I don't know if so that was 16 years ago. I don't know if the same would be true now. But 16 years ago, having a book published by a major publisher that
Yeah.
did well, that it had a huge impact on my credibility and the credibility of my company. And
Mm.
now I think that we have these 5 books and that they're all available and they show up on our website, on my website. I think just overall, like it has continued to increase the credibility that like, oh, these
Mm.
people know what they're talking about. They have these 5 published resources that all seem to have done well. And so I think that's the main thing, is just credibility.
Why do you think this happens? Like, I've also seen um, several authors get kind of a celebrity level status. Like, think about like
Yeah.
Richard Brand. Of course, like he was popular before that, but Robert Kiyosaki, Brendan
Yeah.
Burchard, Tony Robbins, like most of these people, they were kind of unknown before publishing their book.
Yeah.
Why do you think this happens? Like, why people see authors as an uh, authority in the industry?
So I think it's kind of a virtuous cycle. So somebody, let's say somebody who's not very well known at all, publishes the book by some topic that grabs people, and the book does well,
Mm.
and people start reading it and quoting it in various places, and then it's like, oh, the author of that book must know what he or she is talking about. And so then that person starts being interviewed and they say smart things that line up with the book. And so it just, goes like that.
Mm. And I think once you publish a book, it's also a very great reference point. Like, for example, if you get on podcast or a TV shows, people can ask you question about that specific book. It would be a kind of a signature product of yours,
Yes.
right? That is published, that is live in the world. So people can always refer to that book and always ask questions about the book.
Yep.
So that's so yeah, definitely that's and what has changed in your personal life? Like I was talking to an author, and when she wrote the book finally after several years, then she said that something inside her changed. Like uh, for several years, all of these things were in her head, and then finally seeing all of those ideas and those stories and experiences in the paper, and then finally in a book, is very transformative for her. So, for you, like, what was your experience, like personally, mental level, emotionally? What has changed within you?
Huh. That's an interesting question. I maybe this is something odd about me. When I started writing my first book, which was in 2005, I always assumed I would be able to get it published. I assumed I would be able to get it published, that it would be useful, that it would do pretty well. I never doubted that. And it's
Mm,
interesting, it's partly my family. So I'm one of 4 kids,
mm.
and 3 out of the 4 of us are published authors.
Okay.
So my mom was she was a journalism major in college in the 40s, and she was a good writer and had articles published and stuff. And she gave us all a love for language. And so that was just our life. It wasn't like an unusual thing, and
Mm.
20 years before I published my first book, I wrote all the materials for our company. I wrote the website when there was a website. I mean, so writing was just my life. I'd always written short stories. And so it was just like, yes, of course, I'm going to do this. I do remember the first time I saw my first book in a bookstore. It was the Barnes and Nobles in New York City, right
Mm.
to the west of Central Park on 13th Street. And I saw it there on the shelf of business books. I was like, okay. And I guess the only thing is, once having done it, I felt even more confident that I could do it again. So when it came to the second book, I felt like, of course, I can do this. So
Mm.
I don't know if that answers your question.
Yes. When are you going to publish the next book? When is the
Um,
live date?
my writing schedule is to have it done at the end of this year. It will take me, as it usually does, about a year. So at the end of 2024, and then I'll look for a publisher. So we'll see what happens.
So I've dealt with a lot of clients, and most of them they have a lot of ideas, a lot of stories and experience, and they always get confused. Should they put all those ideas in one book, or they should distribute it in books, or other like different books, or kind of creating a series of the books? And that's a very big challenge. Like, of course, uh, for someone, like they don't have any idea at all. For someone, they have too many ideas. How do
Yeah.
you deal with it? And how do you decide that, okay, this is the stop. These are the things that I am going to talk in the book, not these ideas, only these ideas. So how do you process that?
That is a great question. The way I do it is, rather than thinking, oh my gosh, I have a million things to say, I'll throw them all in this book. I always start with, and I said this earlier, what problem am I trying to solve? So with this last book about change that I wrote, we at Proteus, we had a change practice for 10 years, 12 years before I wrote this book. And it was a good process, and it was helping clients through big transformative changes. But what I noticed was that change, big disruptive change, was still really hard for people. And so what I was trying to solve in writing this book is, why is change so hard? And what can we do to make it easier? Those were the questions I was trying. So having the core question like that is wonderfully focusing, because when you have that core question, then you just put in the book what best answers that question, right?
Yeah, yeah.
So if your only starting point is, oh my gosh, I got a bunch of things I could say, that's not going to be helpful to anybody. What problem are you trying to solve? What hypothesis are you trying to prove? What thing are you trying to show? Find that core, and
Mm.
then that helps organize what goes in the book to address that core.
Yeah, we also deal with this problem kind of in a similar way. So we always work with a client and create an outline quadrant. And the outline quadrant consists of four different elements. The first is the idea, the core book idea. The second is why. They have to be very clear that why they want to write a book. The third
Yes.
is the readers, right? Exactly who is the readers, what kind of pain they are experiencing if they haven't read a book yet, and what they will get once they will complete the book. Then fourth is the hook, how this book is different from all the other books on the same
Yes.
topic. So
Yeah.
these four elements, and um, we ask them to also download it and print it out and paste it on the wall where they're working on
Great.
the book. So always it is in front of them. So whenever they are kind of getting distracted and they have different ideas, they know that, okay, this book is only about these, so we should only work on this. So yeah, like
Wow.
we have
I love that, Vikrant. That's wonderful and very so helpful, especially I would think to somebody writing their first or perhaps only book, just to have that
yeah.
framework. That's great. Awesome.
Mm.
Oh,
And
another thing I do that might be helpful for people, for your
mm,
authors, is once I've figured out, as you say, my why, what code am I trying to crack? What problem am I trying to solve?
yeah.
Then Because I always want I do love writing, but I always want my tone to be very conversational. I want it to
Hmm.
be easy and not off-putting and accessible. So I create a mythological readers group. I create a group of readers
Great.
and I make them very specific. Like for my last book, there was uh, a middle-aged black senior vice president, a guy who was having to really transform his company after a merger. He was sitting there. Then there was a young Hispanic woman in her 20s who had been kind
Yeah.
of pulled into helping with the change and really felt like she didn't understand change and she needs. So I put 4 or 5 literal people that I make up and I write to them.
Yeah. So it's like you are talking to them while writing the book. So,
Exactly.
great. Love it. Because eventually, when anyone is reading a book, they're reading it alone, right? They're not reading it
Exactly.
in groups. So,
Yeah.
I love it. Um,
And I do that and make them very different is because I want them to find that place where it would appeal to each of them because as you say,
hmm,
people read books alone. So I
exactly.
want to write it in a way that appeals to this middle-aged black guy and this young Hispanic woman and this older woman who runs an HR function. And, I want to then thread that needle and find a way to speak to all of them.
Hmm.
Right.
One more question I have. So you have written 5 books and you are writing another book as well. How do you make sure that you are not repeating the same core ideas again and again in other books? What's your
So
process?
so the I'll go back again. This thing that I do of figuring out, the code I'm trying to crack. What problem am I trying to solve for people? That is like your framework. That really keeps me in line. And I find that things from other books do creep in. Like
Hmm.
in the change book, um, I, for instance, in each one of my books, I talk about the power of self-talk, about the power of mastering your internal mental monologue. I just think that's a core element of almost everything, and people are terrible at it. And so that's come in all 5 of my books. But like, for instance, in this change book, one of the things we talk about is how important it is to get when you're if you're creating a change in your organization to get clear about the future you're trying to create, to really envision the future state, because it's too scary for people to make
Hmm.
a change if they don't know what's coming. And so I brought in elements of the process of creating clear vision from the Being Strategic book. So, so if some skill, some understanding from a previous book is helpful, I'll bring it in, but I'm trying to solve a new problem. Does that make
Hmm.
sense?
Yeah, yeah, of course, definitely. And usually how long your books are, like number of pages?
I think a number of words versus number of pages, but I think all of my books are between 60 and 80,000 words. I think
It's
that's true.
250 pages or something.
Yeah,
253.
that's
Okay, got it. Yeah, love it. So I just one last questions I have for you. So you are kind of a seasoned writer. You love to write, and you have written 5 books and another writing another book. I'm sure you're going to be writing several more books as well in the future. But what suggestions do you have for those aspiring writers who want to write book, but they're stuck, they're not able to write a book for several years? Uh, so what are the top 2 or 3 things you have, like what kind of advice you can give to them so that they can finally get unstuck and get their book done and published?
if they want to write it themselves versus working with somebody like you or somebody else who can kind of ghostwrite it for them.
Mm,
I would encourage people to just, and this is advice that I've read. Stephen King wrote a very good book about writing, and he says this as
mm,
well. Just write. Just get in the process of writing. Write every day. Keep a journal. Just put aside for a minute the idea of a book because that's like big and
mm,
scary. But just start writing. Just find
yeah,
your voice as a writer. Write about anything that interests you and just get into the momentum of doing that. So that's the first
mm,
thing.
yeah,
And the second thing I would say is write smaller things in the area that you want to create the book, find places to do articles or write blog posts. So just kind of move in that direction. I feel like people try and go from 0 to 60. I'm not writing at
Mhm.
all, and I'm going to write a book. I mean, that's so overwhelming, so start writing and then start writing in the area, and then it'll be much easier to go to the book.
Great advice. Thank you so much. There's one more thing that has worked really well for people like who always struggle to write or who don't like writings, like you. So these people, like usually they're good at speaking, right? They can't write, but they're good at speaking. They can talk for hours and hours, but they always get stuck when it comes to writing or keyboard. So what they can do, there are so many dictation tools, like some extensions or Chrome extensions, some softwares. So instead of you writing the book, once you have the outline ready, you can just start talking and recording it, right? And it will transcribe everything, and you will have your first draft of that chapter ready. It would be a shitty first draft, but at least you have something written, and now you can go through it. So you won't have to stare with to the blank page,
Yeah.
and so you will have something to work on because you have created something, and now you can build upon on that. So that has worked also well for those people like
Oh,
who just hate writing, especially
that's
me. Like,
that's a great idea. And then do you find that most people who don't like writing, once they have a draft, they're okay editing? It's less negative for them to edit?
yeah, for someone like once they see that okay, they have made some progress, like they get some motivation and then they start working. For some people, like again, editing is another big challenge, right?
Yeah.
So for them, we are there to support them. There are other companies as well, like who also support them.
Yeah.
So we have to somewhere expect that writing is not our skill set. Like people like I was shocked to know that even Rich Dad Poor Dad, Stephen Covey's books, Richard Branson's books, all the top 1% books that I see on Amazon, they were ghost written.
Yeah.
When I got to know that, I was shocked. But I realized that these people know the value of their time, and they know that it is not their main skill set, right?
Yes.
They hired
Yeah.
someone else like who has uh, 20, 25 years of experience in writing books and have written several books. So at one point, you have to understand your strengths and weakness. If you
Yes.
see that like you are trying, but you are not able to make progress, then maybe you can approach some.
I
You
think that's
can,
exactly right. I completely agree with what you just said, Vikrant. I think people are kind of like, well, if it's ghostwriting, it's not. But what you said is exactly right. If you don't like to write and you're not great at it,
mm,
you know,
exactly.
a lot of 80,000 words is a lot of work. You're going to take the whole process. Why put yourself through that?
Yeah,
Find really understands you and is, as you say, has the experience, understands your voice, understands what you want to communicate. Why not?
of course. Yeah, of course. Great, Erika. Thank you so much for your time. Like honestly speaking, I have learned a lot of things from you today. So, and I'm in this industry for more than 10 years, and I've learned a lot of things from you. So thank you so much for sharing your wisdom, your insights. I loved talking with you. You have a really great energy. So thank you so much for your time.
So
Um,
glad to help. This has been marvelous, and I hope other people find it helpful as well.
yeah, yeah, sure. Thank you so much, Erika. And thank you so much, everyone, for listening to the show. I'm going to see you in the next episode. Bye bye.